The assembly line stopped moving in February of 1998. It was a quiet conclusion to a philosophy that had defined Swedish engineering for nearly 20 years. When the final Volvo 940 rolled away, it took with it the era of the brick. This was the last true rear-wheel drive fortress built on the premise that a car should protect you first and impress your neighbors second. While the rest of the automotive world chased wind tunnel curves and disposable plastic, this machine stood its ground. It was the peak of honest engineering. It represented a promise of permanence that the industry was about to abandon, and we did not realize what we were losing until it was gone. To understand why this car matters, you have to look at the pressure Volvo faced in 1990. The automotive landscape was shifting violently. Japanese luxury brands were rewriting the rules of refinement with the Lexus LS 400, and German competitors were pushing the limits of complexity. Volvo needed to modernize, but they did not have the unlimited budget required to build an entirely new platform from scratch. The solution was not a revolution, but a careful, deliberate evolution of the 700 series that came before it. Engineers took the existing architecture, which was already legendary for its structural rigidity, and refined it with a level of intentionality that is rare today. The result was a car that looked familiar, but felt undeniably fresher. They smoothed the sharpest corners and redesigned the rear sheet metal to create a softer visual profile. The sloping rear window and higher trunk line were not just aesthetic choices. They managed to cut aerodynamic drag by 12% compared to the previous model. It was a lesson in subtle efficiency. You could still see the upright stance and the commanding visibility, but the air moved over it with less resistance. The decision to keep the live rear axle was perhaps the most controversial choice of the development process. By 1990, independent rear suspension was becoming the standard for executive sedans. Critics called the solid axle outdated. They said it belonged on a farm truck, not a luxury car. But Volvo engineers knew something the marketing departments did not. A live axle is simple, it is robust. It maintains consistent ground clearance even when the trunk is filled with heavy cargo. For the loyalists who bought these cars to tow boats or carry antique furniture, that durability was worth more than a slightly smoother ride over a pothole. It gave the car a sense of capability that a delicate suspension setup could never match. There was a fascinating anomaly in the lineup during those early years, specifically for the North American market. It was called the 940 SE. To the casual observer, it looked like any other 940. But if you look closer at the cowl and the dashboard, you would realize something was different. This was actually the body and interior of the 6-cylinder 960 flagship, but fitted with the 4-cylinder turbo engine. It was a strange hybrid, a moment where the parts bin created something unique. It offered the sophisticated independent rear suspension of the flagship model with the proven durability of the red block engine. It remains one of those rare details that enthusiasts hunt for today, a specific intersection of luxury and utility that never quite happened again. This approach to building a car feels almost foreign now. Today, a new model means a new platform, new electronics, and new complications. The 940 was different. It was the result of taking a proven formula and polishing it until it was perfect. They did not change things for the sake of change. They kept the heavy doors that closed with a reassuring thud. They kept the upright seating position that gave you a commanding view of the road. And most importantly, they kept the mechanical simplicity that allowed these machines to outlive their original owners. The body was a pragmatic update, a way to keep the company competitive in a changing world. But the true soul of this machine was not in the sheet metal or the plush velour seats. It lay in the piece of cast iron sitting longitudinally under the hood. It possessed a specific mechanical secret, a failsafe built into the very geometry of the engine that could turn a catastrophic failure into a minor roadside inconvenience. To understand the cult of this car, you have to look at the engine that refused to die, lift the heavy steel hood, and you are greeted by something that looks almost agricultural by modern standards. There is no plastic beauty cover hiding the mechanical reality here. Instead, there is a large upright block of iron, usually painted a distinctive shade of industrial red. This is the B230, known affectionately to enthusiasts simply as the red block. It is widely regarded as one of the most durable internal combustion engines ever produced. Its reputation is not based on high-performance numbers or exotic materials. It is based on the sheer quality of the casting and the intentionality of its design. In an era where manufacturers were rushing toward aluminum alloys to save weight and improve fuel economy, Volvo stuck with cast iron for the block and the cylinder head. There is a specific heft to this material that aluminum simply cannot replicate. Iron absorbs vibration. It withstands repeated heat cycles without warping. It provides a stable, rigid foundation for the moving parts inside. Modern engines are often designed to be as light as possible, operating on the very edge of their thermal limits. The red block was designed with a massive surplus of material. It is overbuilt in the truest sense of the word, prioritizing longevity over the marginal gains of weight reduction. Perhaps the most significant example of this engineering philosophy is the valve train design. Most modern engines are what engineers call interference engines. This means that the path of the piston and the path of the valves overlap. They occupy the same space at different times. If the timing belt snaps while the engine is running, those heavy metal components collide at thousands of revolutions per minute. The result is catastrophic engine failure. The Volvo engine, however, is a non-interference design. The engineers left enough physical space between the piston at its highest point and the valves at their lowest. If the timing belt breaks on a 940, the engine simply stops running. There is no crunch of metal, no bent valves, and no ruined cylinder head. A roadside catastrophe becomes a minor inconvenience. You tow it to a shop, install a new belt, and drive away. It is a mechanical forgiveness that feels almost benevolent. But durability did not mean the car had to be sedate. In fact, Volvo hid a performance secret in the options list, a factory-authorized cheat code that most owners never knew existed. For those who wanted more than just transportation, Volvo offered an upgrade known as the Turbo Plus kit. This was essentially an early form of engine tuning installed at the dealership. It used a piggyback electronic control unit to modify the boost pressure of the turbocharger under full throttle. It pushed the output to 190 metric horsepower without compromising the engine's lifespan. It transformed the character of the car from a stately cruiser into a highway locomotive. The sensation of that old-school turbo spooling up is distinct. It is not the instant computerized torque of a modern electric vehicle. It is a building wave of mechanical pressure, a reminder that there is actual machinery at work. This performance was sustainable because the supporting systems were equally robust. The cooling system, for instance, was designed for the frozen winters of the Arctic Circle, which paradoxically made it perfect for the hottest climates on Earth. The radiator is massive. The cooling fan is driven mechanically by the engine crankshaft through a viscous clutch, moving a volume of air that electric fans struggle to match. As long as the owner kept coolant in the system, it was nearly impossible to overheat a red block. It had the thermal capacity to shed heat all day long, whether it was towing a caravan up a mountain or sitting in gridlock traffic. The oiling system was just as generous. The oil passages were large, minimizing the risk of clogging even if maintenance was slightly neglected. The main bearings were sized for an engine producing twice the power. This is why you often see these cars with 300,000, 400,000, or even 500,000 miles on the odometer. They were not built to last through a warranty period. They were built to last indefinitely. The engine was the heart of the car, and it beat with a slow, steady rhythm that promised it would always get you home. However, a durable engine is meaningless if the passengers aren't protected. This leads us to the structure surrounding that engine. The durability of the engine was matched only by the obsession with protecting the people inside it. The 940 stands as the culmination of Volvo's safety-first philosophy, moving beyond the brute force engineering of the earlier 240 series into something far more sophisticated. While the previous generation relied on sheer mass and crumple zones to survive an impact, the 940 introduced a level of structural intelligence that the rest of the industry is still catching up to. It was not just about adding more metal, it was about where that metal was placed and how it behaved when the world went wrong. This is most evident in the introduction of SIPs, or the Side Impact Protection System. Before this innovation, a car door was simply a thin barrier between the driver and an oncoming vehicle. Volvo engineers realized that the door alone could never absorb enough energy to guarantee survival in a T-bone collision. Their solution was to turn the entire car into a defensive network. They installed reinforced steel tubes in the front seat and a complex system of transverse members in the floor and roof. When a 940 is struck from the side, the force does not just crumple the door, it is distributed across the entire skeleton of the car, dissipating the energy away from the fragile human occupants in the center. It was a radical rethink of chassis dynamics that turned the vehicle into a cohesive shield. This philosophy of protection extended to the smallest passengers as well. One of the most telling features of the 940 is found in the rear center armrest. In most luxury cars of the era, the armrest was simply a cushion wrapped in velour or leather. In the Volvo, it was a transformer. You could fold it down and then flip a section of the padding up and back, creating an integrated child booster seat. It was a brilliant piece of industrial design that solved a genuine problem for families. It meant that safety was not an accessory you had to buy separately and store in the trunk. It was built into the very fabric of the car. It signaled that this machine was designed for the reality of family life, not just the image of executive success. The commitment to using the highest quality materials is symbolized right on the front of the car. The diagonal slash across the grille holds a circle with an arrow pointing diagonally upwards. Many people mistake this for a symbol of masculinity, but it is actually the ancient chemical symbol for iron. It is a nod to the Swedish steel industry that gave birth to the brand. The 940 lived up to this iconography. The roof pillars were slender compared to modern cars, yet they possessed immense rollover strength. This was achieved not by making them thick and obtrusive, but by using high-grade steel alloys that maintained rigidity without blocking the view. This brings us to the experience of sitting inside the cabin. Modern cars often feel like bunkers, with high belt lines and thick pillars that create a sense of claustrophobia. The 940 is a greenhouse. The belt line is low, allowing for a panoramic view of the world outside. You can see the corners of the hood. You can see exactly where the trunk ends. It gives the driver a sense of spatial awareness that has been lost in the pursuit of aggressive styling. The controls themselves reinforce this sense of substantiality. The buttons on the dashboard were large and blocky, designed specifically so they could be operated while wearing thick winter gloves. The turn signal stalk moved with a precise mechanical weight. Every switch and lever felt like it was connected to something real, offering a tactile reassurance that the systems under your command were ready for anything. Safety is usually associated with a boring driving experience, yet the 940 offered a specific mechanical satisfaction that modern drivers have largely lost. It also hit a dynamic capability that seemed physically impossible for a car of this size, a maneuverability trick that still embarrasses modern hatchbacks. Driving a 940 is an exercise in patience and momentum. It does not accelerate so much as it gathers speed. It is not a sports car in any traditional sense, and it never pretended to be one. But there is a distinct pleasure in piloting a machine that feels like it was carved from a single block of granite. When you are behind the wheel, you are not isolated from the physics of the road. You are managing them. The suspension absorbs imperfections with a heavy, deliberate composure. It settles into corners with a predictable lean, communicating exactly how much grip is available through the seat of your pants. It is a sensation of solidity that modern cars, with their adaptive dampers and active anti-roll bars, often filter out completely. It offers a reassuring sense of ballast, as if the car is heavy enough to crush the road into submission, rather than just rolling over it. One of the most surprising characteristics of this heavy sedan is its maneuverability. Because the engine sits longitudinally, front to back rather than side to side, and the power goes to the rear wheels, the front wheels are not burdened with drive shafts. This allowed the engineers to give the 940 a steering angle that seems physically impossible when you see it from the outside. The front wheels can turn so sharply that the car pivots around its rear axle like a London taxi. You can pull a U-turn on a narrow two-lane road without reversing. It is a practical superpower that embarrasses much smaller, modern hatchbacks that need a three-point turn to do the same job. This rear-wheel drive layout offered more than just a tight turning circle. It provided a level of traction in adverse conditions that defied the stereotype of rear-wheel drive cars being useless in the snow. This was largely due to a piece of mechanical wizardry hidden inside the rear axle of many turbo and cold weather models, the automatic locking differential. This was not an electronic system managed by a computer. It was a purely mechanical device made by Eaton. It used a centrifugal governor that would detect if one wheel was spinning significantly faster than the other. If the speed difference was great enough and the car was moving below 25 miles per hour, A flyweight would fling out and lock the axle solid. Both rear wheels would turn at the same speed, digging the car out of deep snow or mud. It required no button press, no driver intervention, and no software update. It simply worked when you needed it, and disengaged silently when you picked up speed. The connection between the driver and the machine extended to the primary controls. The steering was hydraulically assisted, not electric. This meant there was a fluid link between your hands and the asphalt. You could feel the texture of the road changing. The steering wheel would lighten slightly on ice and firm up in a hard corner. The throttle pedal was connected to the engine by a physical steel cable, not a sensor. When you pressed the pedal, you were mechanically opening the butterfly valve on the intake manifold. There was no computer interpreting your request and deciding how much power to grant you. The response was linear, honest, and immediate. In the later years, specifically from 1995 onwards in Europe, this mechanical purity was perfected with the introduction of the M90 transmission. This was a true 5-speed manual gearbox designed to handle the torque of the turbo engines reliably. It replaced the older 4-speed units that used an electric overdrive button. The M90 was robust, smooth, and matched the agricultural strength of the red block engine perfectly. It was the final piece of the puzzle, creating a drivetrain that felt unbreakable. However, nostalgia often paints a perfect picture, smoothing over the rough edges of reality. The legend says these cars are tanks, but even a fortress has a weak point. There is one specific silent killer that has sent more 940s to the scrapyard than high mileage ever could. To truly understand this car, we must address the inevitable decay that comes with owning a 30-year-old machine. We need to be honest here. The legend of the Volvo 940 has grown so large that it sometimes eclipses the reality of the machine. You will hear people say these cars are indestructible tanks that will run forever, with no oil and no coolant. That is simply not true. While the engineering is robust, the 940 is still subject to the laws of physics and chemistry. It is made of materials that age, degrade, and eventually fail. The engine block might be bulletproof, but the wrapper around it is not immune to the cancer of oxidation. Despite Volvo's extensive use of galvanization and zinc coatings, these cars do rust. If you live in a region where salt is used on the roads, you know this pain. The moisture gets trapped behind the plastic rocker panel covers, eating away at the metal unseen. It attacks the battery tray. It silently dissolves the floor pans while the thick carpet hides the damage from view. The wheel arches are particularly vulnerable, bubbling up from the inside out. The tragic irony is that the drivetrain will often still be running perfectly, while the structural integrity of the car disintegrates around it. It is a reminder that even the best steel is ultimately organic in its desire to return to the earth as iron oxide. Then there is the matter of the automatic transmission. While the manual gearboxes were agricultural in their strength, the automatic options had a finite lifespan. The ZF4 HP22 is a smooth shifter when it is working right, but it is not immortal. It relies on clutch packs that wear down over hundreds of thousands of miles of city driving. If the fluid is not changed religiously, and many owners neglected this because they believed the lifetime fill myth, the torque converter eventually shudders and fails. A common failure mode is the sudden loss of reverse gear, leaving you stranded in a parking lot. Unlike the engine, which can often be revived from the dead with a wrench and a hammer, a slipping transmission is usually a terminal diagnosis for a car of this value. It is the Achilles heel of the invincible brick. The survival of so many 940s is not due to magic. It is due to what enthusiasts call Stage Zero maintenance. This is the unglamorous reality of keeping an old car on the road. It means replacing every vacuum line, every rubber bushing, every seal, and every fluid before you even think about modifications. These cars survive not because they never break, but because they are incredibly simple to fix when they do. A head gasket replacement on a modern luxury car is an engine-out procedure that costs thousands of dollars and requires special dealer tools. On a red block, it is a Saturday afternoon job with basic hand tools. The car respects your time and your intelligence. It invites you to understand it, rather than locking you out with proprietary software and plastic engine covers. There is also a nuance to where these machines came from. We tend to think of them as purely Swedish monoliths, forged in the cold of Torslanda. But the 940 was a global product. If you look closely at the rear window of a 1993 wagon, you might find a small, faded decal. It is a roundel celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Halifax assembly plant in Nova Scotia. These Canadian-built models are a testament to how Volvo exported its philosophy. They were screwed together by people halfway across the world from Sweden, yet they carried the same sense of solidity. It was a universal standard of quality that transcended borders. But as the 90s progressed, the industry moved on. The era of the simple, honest car was closing, leaving the 940 as a standing monument to a vanishing philosophy. By 1996, the showroom floor had become a crowded place where the past and the future stood in stark, uncomfortable contrast. While the 940 continued its stoic watch, the aerodynamic future was already encroaching. To send the old warrior off with dignity, Volvo released the Classic Edition in its final years. This was not merely a badge job, it was a curation of the best components the platform had ever seen. They raided the parts bin of the more expensive 960, equipping these final cars with wood trim, gathered leather upholstery, and specific alloy wheels that gave them a regal presence. It was the automotive equivalent of a gold watch at retirement, a recognition of faithful service that added a layer of warmth to the utilitarian interior. However, just across the factory floor, the philosophy of the company was shifting beneath the feet of the assembly workers. The development of the P2 platform was signaling the end of the rear-wheel drive lineage. The incoming S80 and V70 models were technological marvels, featuring transverse engines and front-wheel drive. But they also introduced multiplex wiring networks and CAN bus systems that required proprietary laptops to diagnose. The 940 was the last Volvo where a problem could be solved by listening to the engine and looking at a spark plug. The new cars were faster, quieter, and more efficient, but they were appliances defined by software. The 940 was a machine defined by mechanics. This transition marked a profound, silent loss for the automotive landscape. The 940 was the last time Volvo, or perhaps any major manufacturer, built a car where ease of service was a primary design pillar. When you look at the engine bay of a 1998 940, you see space. You see an alternator that can be changed in 10 minutes with a basic wrench. You see an oil filter that is easily accessible. Contrast this with the crammed, plastic-shrouded engine bays that followed, where changing a headlight bulb often required removing the entire front bumper. The industry had decided that cars were no longer lifetime companions to be maintained by their owners. They were 3-year lease obligations to be serviced by technicians. In Italy, a market that had always held a peculiar and intense affection for these boxy wagons, the end was met with a unique marketing pivot. As production wound down, they introduced the Polar editions. It was a stroke of genius. Instead of trying to hide the car's age or its lack of aerodynamic styling, they celebrated its archaic, rugged nature. They sold the Polar and Super Polar wagons not as outdated luxury items, but as essential gear for a life well lived, much like a good pair of hiking boots or a heavy wool coat. It was an acknowledgement that while the 940 was no longer cutting edge, it possessed a coolness that the wind tunnel shapes could not replicate. The legacy of the 940 is defined by this specific timing. It stands as the definitive modern classic because it exists in the sweet spot of history. It is modern enough to have fuel injection, anti-lock brakes, and side impact protection, making it safe and usable in today's traffic. Yet, it remains vintage enough to offer the mechanical connection that has been scrubbed from modern driving. It is the bridge between the analog past and the digital future, a standing monument to a vanishing philosophy where heavy meant quality and simple meant reliable. The Volvo 940 was never just a mode of transportation. It was a promise of permanence in a world that was rapidly becoming disposable. It stands as the final testament to an era when a manufacturer cared as much about the third owner as the first. It was built to serve, not just to sell. If you appreciate this kind of honest, over-engineered luxury, you need to see how Mercedes-Benz tackled the exact same philosophy in this video here.